right, we are here with Isaac and Jason. So, Isaac, man, it was great connecting. Can you just share a little bit of who you are and where do you guys serve at? What community are you guys focused in?
Yeah. So thank you guys so much for having me. We serve with or I serve with a company called Pregnancy Solutions. We are here in Southwest Florida, so we service Sarasota County, Port Charlotte County, or Charlotte County, and then DeSoto County within four different towns or cities. So we're in Arcadia, Northport, Port Charlotte, and Venice, kind of helping different families, whether they're in crisis pregnancy, trying to go into schools, have conversations with students, that kind of thing. And so we try to serve the entire family, not just moms. Most people obviously think a pregnancy center, oh, that's for ladies. So we try to encompass all of it.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. So what is it specifically that you do then? Because I know you mentioned going into schools.
Yeah. So I am our outreach and education coordinator, which I always say is just a fancy term for I go hang out with teens. And so basically, I go into schools and try to have what most pregnancy centers would call prevention conversations.
hmm
I don't like using that term all the time, especially in house with students, because I always say, teens, you tell them not to press a red button, they're going to press the red button. So if I tell them I'm preventing them from something, they're usually like, well, what are you preventing me from? And so I try to use equipping a lot more. So I like to have equipping conversations. It's a little bit of semantics, obviously, but it's still a good time. And so go into schools, have conversations about healthy boundaries, healthy relationships, social media usage. We've even started diving into a couple of financial conversations. So if they're getting ready to go into college, or maybe even some students, because I get to meet with young adults too. And so they're maybe already entering college. And so now we're talking about building a budget and that kind of thing. And so we try to encompass a lot of different things as we go in to different schools, different churches, places like that.
So
That's
before
awesome.
we segue into some of like real candid conversations. Can you just highlight because you did give us a little bit of a taste of the type of presentations you do, and I know that there's some overlap, and maybe can you share what presentations you offer, and then Jason can kind of chime in and say, yeah, we offer those as well, and here's also another one that we're doing that maybe you guys are not doing, and we can maybe brainstorm on another time to how we can help youth for the next generation.
Yeah, absolutely. So officially on our website, they are labeled as boundaries, relationships, social media, goal setting, self esteem, and then sexual risk avoidance. So SRA. The financial one hasn't been tacked onto the website yet, but I have been taking that into some select areas. And so that's kind of the broad topics. And then I break those down into smaller portions. And obviously, things end up overlapping. If we're talking about sexual risk avoidance, then we're going to talk about healthy boundaries. If we're talking about healthy boundaries in relationships, we're going to talk about social media. And so we try to do multiple sessions as much as possible. But I also write all of our curriculum. So I try to write it to break it into where it can be either a singular thing or, kind of build on top of each other till we get to that final point. So that's
Mm.
kind of the six or seven that we cover.
Wow. Yeah, that's similar to what we do. Most of the ones you mentioned, we do ourselves, and so that's awesome. It's good to hear another program out there doing that. I don't know how long you've been in the. I don't know what you want to call it, because I've been with I've been with this program for 18, almost 19 years now.
Okay.
Originally, it was abstinence education, and then it's kind of morphed into sexual risk avoidance. But times have changed, and the culture's changed, and so a lot of these schools are are shying away from like abstinence type stuff. So we had to create other content just to kind of provide other options. And a lot of times when we go in and we do those topics, the ones you mentioned, then they're more apt to be like, oh, okay, because like they find out who you are, what you're about, your interaction
Right.
with students, and then they're like, you know what, if these students like this guy and he's very good with them, maybe we could hit on the more hard hitting topics. And so for us, we provide kind of like a la carte, pick and choose what you want,
Right.
and we'll do that. So did you find that for your program, or how did that pan out for you?
Yeah. So I've not even been in this field a full year yet. I'm coming up in October being on my full year. So we're about 11 months at the moment. And, but yeah, we run into those same things all the time. We run into, even churches and schools both. neither really want to touch the abstinence word, that's kind of like a sounds
Y-
gross or
yeah, it's
something,
like,
it's kind of,
yeah,
yeah, exactly. And so we do that a lot. We use those different topics to kind of get in there and start having
right,
conversation with people.
yeah,
And sometimes we get to really dive into that SRA thing,
hmm,
sexual risk avoidance. And
correct,
so I've only really been able to have one serious sexual risk avoidance conversation with students so far, diving into what that looks like and what the dangers are and all that. Otherwise, I kind of have to do the whole sugarcoating it thing. We have a leader that I meet with around here for going into schools, and his thing is we want to say things without saying things.
right,
And so I kind of have to dance around that, right? When I'm in the public schools, I have to, okay, we're not going to use the word sex. We're not going to use the word abstinence. We're not going to use the words porn. Like I have to kind of come up with different ways to say, okay, well, let's talk about healthy relationships. And so then we're going to talk about not being physical, or
hmm,
when we're online, we're going to avoid kind of inappropriate content. And it's so broad that I honestly, most of the times, I don't like sugarcoating it. I would rather say, hey, this is what we're avoiding. This is why we're not doing that.
right,
Because when you leave it broad, it's like, well, what are you telling me not to do? Are you telling me just to never watch another movie? Or are you telling me to like never hug or kiss my boyfriend or girlfriend ever again? It's like, no, no, that's not what we're talking about. I just
yeah,
can't tell you exactly without having a conversation later.
yeah,
And we try to get teachers involved with that as well. I don't like having just a one-on-one conversation with a student unless there's another adult present, just to have that third party, because we're talking about such sensitive things. I never want anybody to come back and be like, well, he told me this, and it's like,
right,
no, I didn't.
right, yeah, right.
Yeah,
No,
so how
yeah,
do we so this is a great segue. So um since we are in the business of helping teenagers make good choices, we want them to make healthy choices, and you allude to it, and a lot of it is the language is very vague. And I don't know if you've noticed this even on TikTok or Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, how you have to learn to use creative language, or else they will shadow ban you, or
Right.
won't, because you can't use, for example, you can't say someone, so here's where someone unalived themselves. They
Yeah.
delete it. So you're saying the same thing, but we've kind of have to learn to kind of use the words that the algorithm is not going to
hmm,
penalize you
yeah,
Right.
for. So it's almost like in the school has kind of given you, hey, you can't say these specific words. So you have to kind of, how do you say the thing without saying the thing? So since we are trying to help teenagers make good, healthy choices, not put themselves in compromising situations, what does good choices even mean? What does that even mean for our teenagers today?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, in this generation, that could be defined as a number of different things, right? Because
Mhm.
we have the whole kind of consistency of live your truth, right? And so at
yeah,
the moment, morality is so subjective to normal culture that you kind of have to come in and be like, okay, well, here's what statistics say, here's what facts say about certain behaviors. And with that, I always try to tell students, right, that when I'm giving you these statistics, I'm not saying that you are that statistic. What I'm trying to do is keep you from going into that statistic. And so, when you approach it that way, then you can come in and objectively say, well, you can't dispute that science or facts, right? Either one would back that if not to be extreme, but if you sleep with more than one person, you're more likely to contract a disease. And so with those things, you can't refute that, right? You can't say, well, no, I'm just going to go sleep with whoever I want and I'm never going to catch anything. Facts are going to dictate otherwise. And so a lot of the times what I end up having to do is kind of address what we're going to talk about and say, okay, we're going to talk about healthy relationships. And most of the time, we end up talking or playing like a little game, right? I try to get them involved first with that kind of thing. And so we'll try to get them thinking first of what's what. And so, for instance, like with a social media and relationships one, I do one that I call social media and social life. And so when we do that one, we play this game of kind of put your thumb up or put your thumb down if you agree or disagree with this statement. And then, so then we do, he's a 10, but he watches nothing but YouTube videos, or she's a 6, but she's your biggest cheerleader in life, you know? And so we kind of throw these different things in there, and then it starts them thinking, and you see kids around the room, and then they're like looking around and they're like, oh, those people don't like that he said that guy watches YouTube all the time. Why is that? Or, you know, they'll look and they'll be like, well, why is the social interaction part such a major thing? You know, and so it starts to get their wheels turning. And then we go into it, we say, hey, we're talking about social media and social life today. So what does that look like? Really getting them to think for themselves first and start to get the wheels turning, then makes them a lot more susceptible, at least in the circles that I'm in, has made them more susceptible to hearing what we're talking about, then to then say, well, statistically, you know, even asking them, what do you guys think is the top social media platform right now, which I haven't checked recently, but last time I checked, it was YouTube, which always shocks everybody because it's entertainment and it's social media at the same time. And so getting that lined up to where we can kind of knock it home of, here's what statistics say, the good choice would be then not necessarily to cut social media entirely, but to more cut the entertainment side of it, right? Because there's such short form content. And so all it is distraction. It's just meant to pull you in. It's just marketing. It's good product placement, so to speak, where if I'm going to go scroll YouTube shorts, well, every so often the algorithm's going to say, well, here's something you like. So it pulls you back in. You want to watch another one, and just keeps going and keeps going. And then you get to this point where a lot of the times you kind of have to lay that out of, well, why is that a bad thing, right? Why do we want to stare away from the entertainment? And it's like I said, it's distraction. If you distract yourself from everything, you're not going to be able to kind of address the things that you really need to address, right? Whether it's a problem at work, a problem at school, whatever. The difficulty, if we start to numb those things, then it creates a bigger problem. And so we usually I try to lay that stuff out and then say, why don't you try using your social media for social purposes, right? Instead of entertainment. Next time you see a post of a friend that maybe lives out of state, maybe he's on vacation, something like that, give them a call. Like right there in the moment, like if you're interested in what they're doing, give them a call. Don't worry about liking the photo. Don't worry about commenting, right? Just give them a ring, ask them how they're doing, ask what they're up to, how the vacation's going, that thing. And even encouraging them to make these connections and then leave their phone in the bag or car, you know, that I always joke with them of like, don't, if you have like Life 360, please don't leave your phone in the car. And then when your parents are trying to get in touch with you, tell them the Real Talk guy told me to leave my phone alone so you can't be mad at me because I don't want parents coming back to me. But but we kind of do that, right? So we try to lay this idea that what they're doing is not necessarily the bad thing, but there's a way to tweak it and shift it to a point where it is a good thing. And so try not to say like, this is bad, this is good, unless it's objectively so, right? If we're talking about SRA, if we're talking about abstinence, there's kind of a hard line there where we have to say this is bad, right? This is going to lead to disease or problem or complication. Whereas with social media, it's like, well, there's a lot of things that can become very subjective about that. And so you have to say, well, here's a better way to use it.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I try to frame each thing that we walk through, that a good choice necessarily is just me trying to tell them the better choice to use.
Yeah.
And so we back that up with statistics, facts, like I said, all that kind of stuff. But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So, but Jason, being that Isaac you're about 1 year into this role, but you have served in youth ministry before. I think I
Yes.
remember you mentioning that when we met. Jason has been doing this. He's mentioned this for 18 years, going on 19. So, Jason, can you speak into, are there patterns that seem different with the current generation than in previous generations when it comes to this idea of good choices?
Yeah. I mean, the cultures, excuse me, culture is constantly changing, as you know. And so, you know, I've been doing this even before social media it was kind of in its infancy. It was starting to pick up. So
MySpace.
now MySpace, it was during the MySpace days. Yeah, it's a good way. But you know, all that stuff was in its infancy, or it wasn't there yet. And then it started to come on the scene. So yeah, the world has completely changed. I remember we used to do a segment on media, and we would talk about just media like TV and movies and stuff like that. Now we focus solely on social media because kids don't
Yeah.
watch TV anymore. So like, yeah,
Right.
you have to change with the times. And then of course you have, the culture changing, especially with the LGBTQ plus community. I remember when we were talking about abstinence, we would talk about sex until marriage. And before 2015, kids who are of that community be like, well, I guess I'm not getting married then because it's illegal. And then of course 2015 hit, and then the Supreme Court ruled it's the law of the land. So now pros and cons, it really opened the doors like, hey, doesn't matter who you are, this message is for you. And so
Right.
our message now cast a wider net. So yeah, I mean, the culture is constantly changing. You got to be on the up and up. I'm almost 50 years old, so I haven't been a teenager for a very long time, so I have to read, I have to study, watch culture, listen to Cultural Translator on my podcast and access.org and all these different resources just to be on the up and up. And plus, I have two teenagers of my own; they kind of keep me educated. But yeah,
Right.
it's constant. Once you think you have it down, it changes. Follow the bouncing ball.
Here's
Yeah.
here's one thing I've discovered, and I have this question for you, Isaac. But one thing I had discovered is that although the times have changed, human nature has not changed. So you mentioned that you go into schools. What's the ratio of the type of schools that you go into? Like, do you go into just strictly public schools? Is it private Christian schools? Is it homeschool co-ops? Is it youth groups? Like, what type of settings are you invited into to talk about some of these things?
Yeah, so majorly, I would say that our when we started off, it was majorly youth groups because it's pretty easy to kind of, I guess, convince a youth leader to come in because they want a night off. Like they do it every Wednesday night, you know? And so it's a little easier to swing that. But we've been getting a lot more into public schools via FCA, so Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And so I've started partnering with them, going to their training sessions. We have two different ones here because we serve in different counties. Charlotte and DeSoto are kind of split to one, and then Sarasota encompasses Northport and Venice. And so when I started in this position, I kind of had nothing. Like there's barely any contacts to reach out to. And not that we hadn't reached out to people before, we just hadn't kind of kept the ball rolling with everybody. And so getting connected with FCA really helped to push into schools where they would give me maybe once every couple of months, I get to come in to one of their sessions. And so most of their schools are public schools, with the exception of a couple of private schools. There's a couple that I just went to my first one this past week called Sky Academy. They're great, but the ratio is mostly public because that's where FCA kind of thrives is making sure that they're in the public schools. And so we've been able to get into 5 or 6 different schools. And even this year, the people that I was working with in the Sarasota FCA have been so generous and let me come in like once a month now. So now I have like a once a month time slot for whatever the weekly meeting is. I get to come in for that month or for that week of that month. And so I get to still kind of do a reoccurring thing with all the students and build it and go a little more in detail with that. And so that's been super great to get to do that with Venice and Northport. And then Port Charlotte is Port Charlotte. It's a little harder to crack the egg on that one. But we've gotten into a couple of different youth groups there. That's kind of predominantly where I get in with that kind of group. And it's interesting because serving in the 3 different counties, I get a different demographic in each county. So it's a little different whether I go into Sarasota or DeSoto or Charlotte. Each one has its own thing, you know. So DeSoto is a little more small town, right? There's like a Baptist church just about every corner block, and so they're a little more hesitant in what we talk about when it comes to SRA. Port Charlotte is a little rough around the edges sometimes, and so they are okay with hearing about it for the most part, but doesn't mean they're going to take it. Doesn't mean they're going to listen to what I'm saying. And
Mm.
then Sarasota County is completely different. Most of them don't want me to bring SRA in because they don't want to hear about it. But we're kind of in a mix, right? We're in like this kind of, I'd roughly say like a 40-60 ratio of churches and schools at the moment. mostly youth groups. I haven't gotten to go to any churches head on. I would love to. That's like one of my dream things that I'm trying to like dream up and hopefully get to, is where we can kind of have this big church session one time, whether that's on a Sunday morning or whether they have a small group we can lead or something like that. Because I very heavily believe in making sure that the parents are informed, that I'm not just going to teens. Because how many teens are going to go home to a parent who doesn't know what I just told them, and it's going to kind of almost undo the work sometimes, or it's just going to kind of not fall on deaf ears, you know? And so we definitely see that ratio kind of fluctuate back and forth, where last year I would definitely say like 70% churches. But now thankfully we're in kind of a 60% schools, 40% churches ratio. And so it's, it's good. I haven't been in too many different private schools right now. There's only 3 on the board. And they're a different demographic in the sense that their principals are a lot more open with that, right? Because it's some of them are Christian private schools, and so they want that message in there. While public schools a little more hesitant because they're like, well, we already have a health class, so don't bring that in here, you know. And so it's
Yeah.
kind of back and forth sometimes.
Wow. It's just amazing to hear how every county is different. We are obviously based in Pinellas. We were in the public schools for the longest time, all the way up until 2022, and that's when they started really kind of pulling us out, and we had to resubmit our materials. And long story short, they actually our main one that we do all the time was goal setting, drugs and alcohol abstinence relationships. They actually picked that apart and just told us not to do it anymore. And then they said we would be interested in your social media safety presentation. So I submitted that one, and they picked it apart, but they approved it. And so it's a kind of a watered down one, but it's one that we offer. But then now they told us that we're not allowed to reach out to teachers. Teachers have to reach out to us. You can make postings about it. Don't tag any teachers. I mean, they got really strict with it.
Yeah,
And so we've actually ventured into more private schools. So our bread and butter right now is private schools, Christian, Catholic, faith-based, non-faith-based, and
yeah,
we can do charter schools, but again, they have to reach out to us. So it's crazy. It's crazy how each county is so different.
Yeah, and
yeah,
I would even add that I praise the Lord that even though we don't have the touch points that we used to with the public schools throughout the school year, Jason has done a wonderful job creating good partnerships with like the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, and any of the rec centers within the county. So the students that we don't have access to during the school year, we have access to in the summer
yeah,
because they have invited us in to talk about all of the different presentations that we offer.
Yeah.
But Isaac, you alluded to something about, so I'll ask it this way. Has there been, how do you balance the directive between letting a teen figure it out because you don't want to tell them explicitly what to do and letting them figure it out for themselves? Like, how do you balance that tension point? Because we want to, like you mentioned, like, all right, they don't want us to talk about abstinence straight up, that it's
right,
wrong. So we'll just use the facts. We'll use the statistics to kind of say, hey, if you, all right, listen, if that's what you want to do, let me just tell you what's the stats show if you want to engage in that type of behavior. So, how do you balance that tension? Like, okay, I'm gonna just tell you these facts, and y'all just gonna have to figure it out.
right. Yeah, so I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, everybody's going to have to figure it out for themselves in one way or another, right? Whether they choose to believe the statistic and follow through with it, they're
Hmm.
going to figure out that it was correct. Otherwise, they're going to not follow it and they're going to figure out it was still correct. And it helps because ultimately, part of my testimony is that I am the statistic I'm warning them about, right? So in high school, I made poor decisions with my girlfriend. I was in a private Christian school. I got kicked out because of it. And that was something that I had to live with and deal with. So, you know, praise the Lord, to my knowledge, I didn't get any kind of, you know, disease or consequence in that manner. But I definitely made my mistakes and I definitely had to live through that. And even coming into marriage later, you know, you have to talk about that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so it's a little easier in the sense that I will not shy away from telling a little bit about my story. Again, I still have to be vague, right? I can't say that I jumped in the back seat with my girlfriend. I have to say that I was physical with her. you know? And sorry if that was a little crude to say it that way, but that's part of what I've come through, that ultimately the Lord has now prepped me to be able to do this stuff, you know, and talk about these things. And even if a student isn't a believer and they don't, you know, they don't care about my testimony per se, they do care that I've walked through that before them. And so I can say, hey, I, even when I do my social media one, right, I pull up my screen time in front of them and I'm like, hey, this is mine. Like, I'm here with you guys. Mine's 10 plus hours, you know, and you know, we joke like, oh, well, most of mine's work. I have to use my phone for work. But then you open it up and it's like 6 hours on YouTube and you're like, yeah, that wasn't for work. So, you know,
Yeah.
but it shows them that I'm not just telling them something to tell them something, right? I'm telling them something that I do believe. And even when I get multiple sessions with them, I follow through with whatever step I'm telling them. So with the social media one, I tell them to kind of look at their screen time, and whatever that is, I kind of challenge them to come back the next week and have cut it in half.
Mm.
And a lot of that is to try and push them into a more productive space where they use that other half of their time for a sport or a hobby or friends, or you know, something else that's a little more productive than spending time on the phone. And then I try to make sure that I do the same thing within that week, that I also cut down my time. I say, hey, you guys cut down yours, I'll bring mine back and it'll be half as well. And praise the Lord for a great wife. She helps me with that. She tells me to put the phone down because I would still just be scrolling it. I'd be doing scrolling like every other teen on the face of this planet. But doing that also shows them, hey, okay, this guy who's telling me it is going to walk through it too. And so when it comes to the healthy boundaries and the healthy relationships, you start to point out other scenarios, other situations that kind of lead to this point of, well, yeah, I never really thought of it that way. So like with healthy relationships and boundaries, I bring up the idea of a guardrail on it with a road, you know. And it may sound cliche, but nobody looks at the other side of the guardrail and is like, oh, I'm sure it would be great to drive my car on that side of the road. Most of the
Hmm.
time, we're like, yeah, I'm going to stay on the pavement. Why? Because our car will break if we go on the other side of the road. It
Yeah.
wasn't meant for that terrain.
Yeah.
And in the same way, I lay it out. You know, that's what happens when you guys cross boundaries. If you cross to the other side where you weren't meant to drive, so to speak, you're gonna cause damage to your body, whether that's mental, whether that's emotional, whether that's physical in the form of some disease. And I get a little bolder, I think, than some schools opt for sometimes, not out of disrespect, typically out of just passion. I kind of lose myself sometimes. And so I will say something like disease, and then I have to have a conversation with a couple of students of like, hey, what do you mean by that? You know, and
Mm.
so then we grab a teacher and we have that conversation real quick. But
Hmm.
a lot of times they understand what I'm talking about. If I
Yeah.
say the word disease, they start to equate it. Okay, I know what he's talking about. If I
STDs.
talk about boundary, right? Most boundaries, they understand what I'm talking about. That I'm talking about not having sex before marriage, um, and we lay it out that way. We lay out the idea of marriage, right? That statistically, people who get married are in a more thriving position, you know. And there's other statistics that go into that. We try to not necessarily stay away from them. We'll have a one-on-one conversation about that, because I've had students that come up and say, well, you know, I thought divorce rates were super high, or I thought, you know, like most Christian marriages end in because of financial reasons and all this other stuff. It's like, that is true. Those statistics are there too, and we can talk about those. But
In
ultimately,
general.
the people, exactly, right, in general. And so, but if we talk about the statistics of marriage, right? Families who end up getting married, the child's in a family with a mom and a dad, they tend to do better. That's where the statistic lands. And so on top of that, you're not faced with even the idea of a consequence, right? Because if you have that one-to-one relationship and it's just you and your partner, preferably male and female, right? Then that's where we're going to land. That you're not going to end up with something. And even if you do, then you can treat it, and then you're not going to have to worry about it again because you guys have eliminated it out of your circle, right? And so there's a lot of times where students will say, well, I've already done this. I've already gotten to this point. I've been with so many people. How do I come back from that? It's like, you may want to go find a clinic or a health center that will test right? Figure out what's going on there. Even if you have to drive there after school one day, whatever, go find out, because that's going to be your first step, right? If you find out you have one, then have an STD, then it's going to be better that you go ahead and treat that, regardless of if you have a partner right now, regardless of if you're sleeping with anybody. And then once you've done that, you've taken that first step to getting rid of that first consequence, right?
Hmm.
Then you have to step into, if you're in a relationship, how are we going to proceed from here? And I had a girl come up to me one time when I was in a school after I got done with my whole boundaries and relationships and all that stuff, and she was on fire. We talked about marriage, we talked about guys leading, and physical boundaries and that kind of thing, and she was like, so should a guy be like I should be following whoever my boyfriend is, right? Like I should be able to follow him. I should be able to trust him to lead me. I was like, to a degree, yes. Like there's ultimately a lot more that comes with marriage, but even in your dating relationship, he should be leading you. And she was like, well, what if he's not leading me? I was like, well, I'd either bring it up to him, you guys talk about that, see if he can step up. But it also comes down to what is he leading you into, right? If he is leading you one way or another, just what is he leading you into? And she kind of very, what's the word? She basically expressed that they were being physical.
Mm.
And so I was like, well, whether that's on you or on him, you guys keep going into that area. He keeps leading you into that area one way or another. And she was like, I've got some words for him. And she just took off down the hall. And I was like, I don't know what just happened. I don't know if I just caused a breakup. I don't know what, what I just caused. And a teacher later informed me that they ended up breaking up because she came back and told the teacher I wasn't having him lead me that way. That's obviously, I'm not here to break up every teen on the face of the planet, but it was still a move in the right direction. It was still a move towards that
Right.
180, right? That shift into to kind of correcting course on what you're doing. And
Right.
so trying to get them to make a good decision or not, all I really can do is put the statistics out there, put the facts out there, even tell them I'm there with them. And then they're still going to have to make the decision at the end of the
Mhm.
day, because there are going to
Yes.
be kids in the room who are glazed the whole time, shake
Yeah.
a hand in front of them and they won't see you. So it just comes down to it. And then as a believer, for me, it comes down to trusting the Lord with them, right? I can't, just in the way I can't win anybody to Christ, I can't necessarily, like, you know what I mean? I can't be the one that wins them. The Lord has to do that still
Hmm.
through me. And in the same way, I can only give them the statistics. I can't make them do anything. So, and that's how I try to just approach it every time, is that there are going to be some that listen, some that don't. And I'm just going to keep talking. I'm going to keep engaging with them, try to connect with them. And we're just going to see who does listen and who doesn't. And hopefully the ones that don't listen, they either learn later or maybe they learn before they get to that line. And so
Hmm.
that's kind of where I am with that.
Jason, do you have any
Yeah.
thoughts?
No, I'm hearing them loud and clear. One of the things that the district, throughout the years, because we were battling with them for probably about 10 years before they eventually pulled the plug. But, they really, because of complaints from parents of our program, we really had to make sure we're adding certain key elements. So one of the things we had to say was, we're not here to tell you what to do. This is an option for your life. That verbiage had to be in there because, especially if we're talking about saving sex until marriage, not everybody wants to do that or is opposed or approving of that. So yeah, we had to use that language, and it is true. I mean, we can't make them do anything. I mean, we're not here to tell you what to do. This is an option for your life. So yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from with that.
So, to land the plane, I just want to ask one last question because obviously we are around teenagers a lot and we see things and we get to see teenagers in their natural habitat, in their natural element, so to speak. And we see things and we want what's best for them, but at the end of the day, we're not their parents. So, if you can give parents and youth workers one key insight for helping teenagers make a wise or good choice, what could it be?
Yeah, I mean, man, you had to give me just
Such
a
a
second
loaded
on that
question,
one.
I know.
Yeah, it is a
Yeah.
very loaded question. Man, yeah. So could have caught me with that one. So, I mean, a major thing is that you're at the end of the day, teens are still going to listen to their peers. right? And they're still going to listen to their parents even. And so when we're out there talking to them, we kind of have to level with where they're at also, that some of them aren't going to be coming from the household or the situation that we're telling them to be in. And so when you go into those situations, you have to be ready to kind of dive into almost have like this very broad parachute to catch everything, right? That when you walk in and you say we're going to talk about these healthy boundaries, those kids have never seen it modeled in their life, right? And so some of them have, but it always most of the time the lack of boundaries is because they've never seen it before, whether that's from family members, church members, whatever else. And so in a very similar way that, in a walk with Christ, we're called to reflect that, we're called to walk in that. We have to walk in that ourselves, right? So we have to walk through the same things that we're telling them to do, kind of like what I said with the screen time thing, right? So that comes down to even, okay, what am I posting on social media? Because I don't know how many people are going to come from, for us, we have an Instagram page. How many people are going to come from the Real Talk page to find my Instagram account? And then what are they going to see on my Instagram account? What are they going to see that I'm liking now? Right? Because now we have the whole feature. You can see what your friends like, you can see what they're watching, that kind of thing. And so in order to really level with them, we have to be able to be real with them. And in order to be real with them, we have to be walking the thing that we're telling them to do. Because if I go in and just tell you, hey, stop using your phone so much, and then I'm over here on my phone 24/7 playing a game or scrolling Instagram, it's just going to fall on deaf ears. I don't know how, but students know. Like they know when you're full of junk, like
Yeah.
they're not, nothing gets past them most of the time.
Yeah.
So whether you're working in the area, whether you're just a parent trying to figure out how to help walk them through that, a lot of the times it's just going to come down to honesty, right? And so if you're not walking in that way, you got to be honest and say you're not walking in that way, right? And you got to be able to say, I was there, I did that, I didn't do the thing that I'm telling you to do, or I do the thing that you're telling me to do, and this is how I've seen it change me. And so I really believe that honesty is like the key thing that we always have to have with them. We have to be real with them. That's what students want. They want authenticity because the world is so shifting, because there's this whole live your truth. There's shifting morality. They want someone who's going to come in and authentically say, hey, here's where I'm at, here's what I've found, this is how I'm living, this is how I'm asking you guys to take a look at your lives and to make that decision from there. And so if we come in with fake nonsense or just the statistics, there's nothing for them to relate to. There's no reason for them to listen to any word we say. There's no reason to believe any statistic we throw out there unless there's some kind of physical proof in front of them to back it up. So that's kind of what I would say. Like honesty is a major key thing. Being authentic is a major key thing. And you got to walk in that same way in order to be authentic in that way.
Good. Yeah.
No, that's good. I love the word authenticity is currency
Yeah.
to a lot of young people. And from my experience, I walk that fine line of telling personal stories too. I
Yeah.
find that when I share personal stories, I have their attention. It
Yeah.
makes me more human in their eyes. And then it's no longer, yeah, I know you've told me that you've been a teenager before, but you're not really a teenager. Mr. Reyes, you're almost 40 years old. And it's like, again, going back to what I said earlier, like, yeah, I didn't have an iPhone when I was a teenager. I didn't have full unrestricted access to the internet as a
Right.
teenager.
Right. Yeah.
But human nature is human nature. So I, for me, when I was a teenager, my senior year in high school, so you were, how old are you, Isaac?
I'm currently 23. So
Okay, so
Um,
I have 15 years on you.
such a youngin.
So when you were 3 years old, my phone was a T-Mobile Sidekick. And Jason, do you remember the T-Mobile Sidekick, Jason?
I do. I didn't have one, but I remember them. Yeah.
So that was my phone as a senior in high school, the T-Mobile Sidekick 1. And it revolutionized the smartphone era. It was like the precursor to the iPhone because it was the one phone that you did have access to the internet. You can search the web. But what made it stand out was its AOL Instant Messenger feature. We no longer had to be in front of our computer to use AOL Instant Messenger. We can now take it
Right.
with us. So at the end of the day, you began to find ways how to. The Bible talks about us apart from Christ in our sinful nature, apart from grace. We have the potential to be inventors of evil. So I say that because even though I didn't have an iPhone, I still found ways to scheme on my sidekick. I found ways to hide things from my parents. So authenticity is currency because I can tell them, hey, when I was your age, I fought through the same temptations. I had inappropriate relationships. I know what it means to be physical, like using the language that you're talking about,
Yeah.
where I want to level the playing field and I want to tell you all the heartbreak and pain and suffering that I have invited into my life as a result of those poor decisions. And I care about y'all so much. I don't want you to make those same decisions because I lived it.
Right.
So, Isaac, man, thank you so much
Yeah.
for hopping on this call. We're definitely going to have you on some more because we're in the same space. We're trying to reach young people. We want them to make good, healthy, godly choices. And, we also want to find ways of how can we share the gospel, how, with some students when we're allowed to.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I'm going to hit the stop and record button right here.
Awesome.
I know Jason has a hard stop.